Mark read everything he could find about bridges. He read about David Steinman, the engineer who designed the Mackinac Bridge and was supervising its building. Mr. Simon built the Mackinac Bridge and built bridges all over the world. He wrote poetry too. He said the Mackinac Bridge would be a poem stretched across the straits. Next summer, Mark would be working full-time on the ferry. He decided he would save his money and go to engineering school. While the snow crept down from the roof and their house up from the ground, closing off the windows, Mark imagined himself in the steamy jungles of Brazil building bridges across the Amazon River. In the spring of 1956, the bridge men made a catwalk of 2 wires on each side of the bridge. They draped the wires over the 2 towers in the graceful curve. Chain link fencing was placed between the wires. The catwalk would allow workers to spin the cables that would hold up the bridge. Luke came home. "I walked it," he shouted. "I walked right across the bridge on the catwalk." Mark saw his mom shiver as she looked out at that narrow pathway, 500 feet in the air. "I guess it's time for me to look for a new job," Captain Hansen said. A necklace of lights were strung along the catwalk for the bridge men who were working around the clock. Mark dreamed he was alone up on that catwalk, so close to the moon and the stars he could touch them. All summer long, wheels like giant spiders crept back and forth across the bridge, stringing wires. Mark could hear the cowbells on the wheels warning the men on the catwalk to get out of the way. There were over 12,000 strands of wire in each cable. The cables had to be strong, for they would hold up the floor of the bridge. Captain Hansen said, "I heard they're going to chop the top off of one of the ferries and use it as a barge. I'd sink the Aurora before I'd let them do that to her." That winter, an offer came for the ferry. When the bridge was completed, the Aurora would be sent downstate to the Detroit River. "At least it will still be carrying cars," the captain said. "What about you, Dad?" Mark asked. "What will you do?" "I got a pretty good offer from a company whose ferries go from Mackinac City to Mackinac Island." "That's great, Dad," Mark said, but he couldn't help thinking of how small those Mackinac Island ferries were. You could put a couple of people inside the Aurora. The April of 1957 brought one of the strait's worst storms. 70-mile-an-hour gusts bent the trees and stacked ice as high as skyscrapers. When the gulls returned later in the spring, the bridge still stood. That summer, the shores were crowded with cheering people. They had come to watch the roadway lifted onto its steel support and attach the fringe of the wire that hung down from the cables. At the last, the lower and upper peninsula were joined. Mark's heart was going so fast he could hardly breathe. There was still a lot to do to meet November 1st deadline. The roadway had to be paved and the bridge painted. Now when Luke went to work, their mom packed dinner for him as well as lunch. Sometimes he didn't get home until midnight. Sometimes he worked all night. Captain Hansen was working longer hours as well. He was polishing all the bridge work on the Aurora and giving her deck a new coat of paint. "I want to be proud of the boat I send downstate," he said. He gave the ferry a loving pat. Mark jumped out of bed. It was the 1st of November. Today the bridge would open to traffic. Michigan's governor was going to lead the parade. School had been given a day off and hundreds of cars would be crossing the bridge. Just as Mark and Luke were leaving, the captain said, "I hope you're not planning to cross the bridge without your mother and me." That night, there was a celebration with fireworks. Mark and Luke and their mom and dad watched from the deck of the Aurora. The sparks from the fireworks tangled with the lights from the bridge. When the fireworks were over, Captain Hansen brought the ferry boat home from its last trip on the straits. Later, after everyone was asleep, Mark crept out of the house. It was warm for November. He walked the mile from their house to the straits. The string of lights glittered on the deserted bridge. Mark was sure that somewhere there was a river wider than the straits, and he would build the bridge that crossed it. And that is the story of the Mackinac Bridge that connects the Upper Peninsula and the Lower Peninsula in Michigan. Have a good night.